Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see your smiling faces. My name is Emmanuel Lopez Bastos. My pronouns are she and her, and I am most grateful to live on this land, most recently stewarded by Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and home to many other First People since time immemorial. I've been invited by Reverend Jim to speak with you today about some of my personal reflections regarding water. Thank you, Reverend Jim. It's an honor to be here this morning and to be part of this church community. I come to this work, to equity work, as a labor advocate for many years, and so it is through this lens that I frame my remarks. So let's talk about water. Water is often described as majestic. I think glaciers are pretty majestic, and while I've never come too close to one myself, a quick search on Google showed me that there's over 200,000 glaciers in the world and that Canada boasts about 267 named glaciers. Water is life-giving. It's estimated that a child's body is made up of approximately 80% water. The average percentage of water in an adult's body sits at about 60%. But despite this, the consensus remains that the human body can only survive about 3 days without water. Without water, we also wouldn't have our amazing ecosystem. Water also symbolizes a sacred rite of passage in life. I recall my children's baptisms, and then, at the last stage of life for close relatives, their inability to drink water became an indicator to caregivers that their time to pass on from this life drew near. Water is life-saving. Over the past month, we've seen the devastation of wildfires, which burned down the historic town of Lahaina in Hawaii. It is estimated that more than 50 people scaled the Lahaina seawall and jumped into the Pacific Ocean to escape wildfires. The U.S. Coast Guard rescued 17 survivors and assisted in recovering 40 others offshore. And speaking practically, filling up my water bottle is often the last thing I do before I leave the house. And I'm pretty sure most choir members would agree that a little water for the voice box never hurt before the start of service. So we know water is critical, but it is also scarce. According to the World Health Organization, about 2.2 billion people around the world don't have safely managed drinking water services. 4.2 billion people don't have safely managed sanitation services, and 3 billion lack basic hand-washing facilities. That means that 1 in 3 people globally don't have access to safe drinking water. I grew up in Nicaragua, Latin America, and I really can't remember any family homes which didn't have a water reserve somewhere in the home. Usually a cement basin filled with water, just in case. In those days, the government would coordinate power and hydro outages as it strove to deal with water inequities and infrastructure issues. Despite being a country bordering the Pacific Ocean on one side and the Atlantic Ocean on the other. However, we don't have to go that far to see austerity or inequity. By 2050, 5 billion people around the world, or around 2/3 of the world's population, will face at least 1 month of water shortage, according to UN reports. Canada has almost 1/5 of the world's fresh water, and yet water inequity is present and is growing. In Canada, the disappearance of glaciers will cause sea levels to rise, along with ecosystem degradation, according to a study done at UBC. This study found that most Western Canada glaciers will disappear by the year 2100. In fact, it's estimated that about 80% of mountain glaciers in Alberta, in British Columbia, in the Yukon, will disappear in the next 50 years, according to a 2018 UN study on global warming. But young people are paying attention. Young people care deeply about ensuring that their Earth is sustainable into future generations. Autumn Pelletier is an 18-year-old Anishinaabe and world-renowned water rights advocate and leading global youth environmental activist. She says, "We must continue to pray for the water, as there is no life without water." When we think about the impact of climate change, water inequities, and access to water issues, it's critical to consider these in relation to Indigenous justice. Indigenous and Northern communities face among the greatest challenges to accessing clean water in Canada. Iqaluit was left without clean water for almost 2 months, starting in October 2021. That affected almost 8,000 people. And statistically speaking, today, most drinking water advisories are also in Ontario. Water is within a framework of constitutionally protected rights in Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution Act. And 2 years ago, on June 21, 2021, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act received royal assent in Canada. Water is cited in this legislation in terms of rights to free, prior, and informed consent, and the right for Indigenous people to maintain and strengthen their relationship to water. As of August 21 this year, though, 28 long-term water advisories remain in effect in 26 communities. And did you know that some of these have been in place for more than 25 years? Take the case of Shoal Lake 40, for example. It's located in the Eastman region of Manitoba and the Kenora district of Ontario. Community members lived under a long-term water advisory for 24 years, and it took until 2001 to be lifted, when construction of effective roads made the building and upkeep of a new water treatment plant possible. Furthermore, as of September 11th this year, there were 34 short-term drinking water advisories in First Nations communities, excluding BC. Once these drinking water advisories reach over a year, they become long-term drinking water advisories. So if we look back to the sanitation measures during COVID-19 pandemic, we know that Indigenous peoples were disproportionately affected. One study showed that in one community, homes with water cisterns had twice the number of COVID-19 cases compared to communities where water ran into the home. It remains the responsibility of government to address infrastructure build and upkeep on reserves such as drinking water advisories, but we know that these have been historically underfunded. More funds and resources are needed to support the development of necessary publicly delivered infrastructure, such as more effective water treatment process and the ongoing training of water treatment operators and supports. After all, a single drinking water advisory can mean that as many as 5,000 people lack access to safe drinking water. Water is sacred. We need it to survive. Sustainable water measures in Canada should never have to be fought for. Lack of clean water is indeed one type of environmental racism because it is systemic, because it is compounding in the experience of oppression that many people face across race, across class, across disability. All persons should be able to live with the assurance that the state of water that flows through their pipes is sound, that the state of rivers and community waterways aren't contaminated, and that the disproportionate access to water is eliminated. So as we look to strengthen our stewardship to water, let us remember that we also are connected, and that the work that we do to challenge water scarcity in Canada and to support water justice will also support the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, for sharing your professional and personal experience in such a clear and understandable way. Drought, wildfires, fog, floods, flash freezes, tornadoes, hurricanes, heat domes, monsoons, blizzards, hail, snowmageddon, tropical storms, ice fog, polar vortex, king tide, supercell, dry thunderstorm, century storm, coastal storm surge, 1,000-year floods, and a derecho. We live in a world of climate change with huge, rapid extremes, one way or another, in our weather. As I was writing this message, it was on the first day of school here in Walton. Do you remember it was 38 degrees with a humidex over 40? Weather words we never even knew a few years ago are now ingrained in our vocabulary. And as Canadians, we love to talk about the weather, but we are talking about it even more. So all those words I began my part of this message, in one way or another, involve water. Too much, too little, too hot, too cold, water. Peter, in our text, read the story of the Samaritan woman who came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, that was a radical expression for a man to a woman who weren't related in two different cultures. You see, his disciples had gone into town to buy food. And Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." It's one of the ways we understand Jesus, the light of the world. We understand him as living water, the way, the living water. Both the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and Orange Shirt Day take place on September 30th. Orange Shirt Day is that Indigenous-led grassroots day intended to raise awareness of individual, family, and community intergenerational impact of residential schools, and to promote the concept you see on some of the shirts worn today, that every child matters. The orange shirt is a symbol of stripping away of culture, freedom, self-esteem, and self-expression. On September 30th, we are encouraged to wear orange to honor the thousands who were survivors of residential schools. Now, water in the Bible is mentioned 722 times. That's more than faith, hope, prayer, and worship. You could say the Bible's all wet. Global News on March 22nd of this year wrote, "Wednesday marks World Water Day, a day raising awareness that more than 2 million people living today without access to safe water, including many First Nations in this nation of ours." We have read of long-term boil water advisories. Currently, there's 28 in Canada. The majority, as we heard from Emma, in Ontario. So maybe in your mind you have connected Orange Shirt Day and also crystal clear water and fishing nets and thermal socks. For those outside who live much of their day or all of their day outside, rain, snow, and sleet on the streets, and humidity, water is an essential factor of their daily life. Most of us live in places with good roofs. Heating systems, air conditioning systems, ventilation systems. But living on the street is different. water. Every week we cannot help but see news about the destruction of wetlands, ministerial development orders, which challenge our water supplies. Of course, this week, saving the Greenbelt, especially the Oak Ridges moraine. We read about forever chemicals in our water. But this is nothing new. The first book of the Bible begins with water. In Genesis, here's what it says about water. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning, and the second day God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered in one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land this ground, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. God's creation is good. Water is good. Water is very, very good. Water is a gift from God. Water, as we've heard in the youth story, is essential for daily life. What we do is we need to reflect on how we can be good stewards of water. Individually, as a society, as Christians, as a church. Breaded sole with lemon is my favorite fish dish. What about you? What is your favorite fish that you might use a net to land or catch? Today, our focus is not the soul we eat, but the souls who need the soles of their feet to be kept warm. In the past, on Sock Sunday, we've used a goalie net, a basketball net, a fridge, and wooden baskets. In fact, some of you might have seen me on my phone during the youth story and thinking, who's he texting? Well, it just came to me, a vision of what next year's socks will be thrown into. You have to wait 11 months. Bronte's history is that of a fishing village. There are still many, and some of those nets are borrowed from them. Some are going out today, and we have to get them back to them, who go out to the ends of the piers to fish or go out on boats to fish. Of course, to experience an abundant catch of fish, we need to have clean water. Whether it's salt water or fresh water, the better the water, the better the fish. Your City Sports is a sock company that has buy one, give one culture. It's its corporate attitude, and it donates one set of socks, pair of socks for each one purchased. And they identify 3 reasons these socks are so important for the homeless. The average person living on the street walks a lot. Keeping your feet dry and warm on the street is a huge challenge. And clean, dry socks equal healthy feet. They don't have cars. They walk. To get to appointments, to get to food banks, to find shelter. Walking. Remember as a kid getting a soaker? Maybe you even took the plastic of around bread. Do you ever do that when you had a hole in your boot? And you took the plastic bag they used to put bread in, and you put it on your foot, and then you stick it in the boot that's got a leak? Healthy feet are the ticket to mobility. Healthy feet are part of human dignity. And our story today of Jesus at the well with the woman continues when we read, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." You know, Jesus is living water. As we follow in the footsteps of Jesus, one of the ways we can respond is to be good stewards of water, so that we have crystal clear water. We also, as a congregation, historically through outreach, offer thermal sock protection. Thank you. Thank you for your help today.